Well, it does seem like we've got a good group here, so I'm going to get us started. So, good afternoon. I'm Emily Ruddick with Mass Creative, and I'm here with Anissa, Richleen, and Kelsey. We make up Mass Creative, a statewide arts advocacy and organizing group. And this is our July Artivist Town Hall. So we're going to try to give you the latest and greatest that we're hearing on the federal, state, and local levels. And then this session this month, I'm really excited to dig in with three folks who are doing some really important work around cultural space policy in Massachusetts. So let's get started with the first part. A reminder, if you don't mind, to keep yourself muted so that we can just avoid noise distraction. And we also, please use the chat for questions, for information that you have that you want to share with the group, with upcoming events that are related to advocacy or policy or organizing. We're looking for all of that. Okay, so without further ado, here we go. I'm going to start with some updates. So 2 days ago, the House Interior Subcommittee the House Subcommittee on Interior Appropriations made their recommendations for the fiscal year 26 budget. This is the federal budget that we're talking about here, and their process is much longer and much more convoluted than ours in Massachusetts. But the end result is that the House Subcommittee is recommending a 35% cut from the previous year to the National Endowment for the Arts and the National Endowment for the Humanities. It's important to note that this is the House's response to the president's budget, which the president proposed, eliminating the NEH and the NEA. So on the one hand, a cut is very serious, and we are not taking that lightly. But on the other hand, they are not completely eliminating the agencies or zeroing out the funding, which is a small win that we're going to take and we're going to build on here. What happens next? So the House is debate their budget, and during that process, any member of the House of Congress is able to put in a floor amendment, right? And that is a big red flag for us, right? Because that's the time when an amendment gets placed that does something like adds a lot of strings to funding for the arts and culture in the nation. Somebody could potentially put a floor vote to lower that number again. So we need to pay attention, and we're going to be watching that. What you can do about that. So reach out to your member of Congress. Honestly, we have a really strong delegation that is certainly incredibly supportive of arts and cultural funding on the federal level. We can't take that for granted. So the first thing that you can do is make sure that your member of Congress and your member of Congress's office, and specifically, they all have a staff member who is supposed to focus on cultural policy, on arts and cultural policy. Make sure that you're reaching out to your congressional office and that you are building those relationships and that connection. Even things including I know that this is something that you support, and I want to thank you for continuing to support that, matters, right? Our congressional delegation is 100% Democrat, so they don't have power over committees, but they still have relationships with their colleagues, and we want to make sure they know we are backing them and that we are paying attention to this issue. You'll see on this slide, there are many ways you can reach out to your member of Congress. We always encourage calls. They signal that you care about this issue a lot, right? And they take that seriously. Personalized emails are probably the next best thing. And if you're in a pinch, there are, templated emails. We have actually put in the chat a link to the Americans for the Arts Action Fund. They have both a call script that you can use, and they have a template email that you can use. So those are two ways you can get involved right now. Let's talk about what's happening on the state level. So in July, for the first time in many, many years, the governor signed our fiscal year 26 budget. So our budget is done for the state for the year, but we need to be really cognizant of the fact that they are both the legislature and the governor are deeply concerned about what is happening on the federal level and how that is going to impact the state budgets. And they have all signaled that there's the possibility for cuts to the budget depending on what is happening. So it is really important that we still keep paying attention to that, and Mass Creative will be sharing out updates and alerts as we know them, but I just want to flag that, like, it's great our budget is done. And I also want to just flag here that the Mass Cultural Council budget was level funded, which in a really tight, scary budget year is a win. Right? That is a win that we were not, there were other budget lines that were zeroed out or were deeply decreased. And the Mass Cultural Council budget, which is the largest amount of money that goes to arts and culture in the state through the budget process, was level funded. So that is a good thing for us. The other thing to know is that yesterday the House Committee on Federal Funding Policy and Accountability held a oversight hearing. This was to hear from folks within the arts and cultural sector about what rescinded and canceled federal grants mean for the sector. They also heard from the tourism tourism sector around around the decrease in tourism to Massachusetts, and for international tourism largely, and what that is going to mean for our larger sector. So it was really amazing. The Mass Cultural Council testified, Mass Humanities, the New England Foundation for the Arts, the New England Museum Association, folks from the Berkshires, from north of Boston, the folks from the library community, including the president-elect of the American Library Association, and then some of our leaders in the tourism space, including the Regional Tourism Council Association, all testified to share what was happening. We have put together some of the findings from some surveys that we worked on, and that is available on our website. If you are, so the reason that this matters is because we need to get on the record and we need to start socializing and lifting up what these canceled grants and what anticipated federal funding loss will mean for our sector in terms of our ability to continue to deliver to our communities, in terms of our ability to continue to be an economic driver and an employer in Massachusetts, right? So this was an important moment for us to make sure that the legislature was paying attention to this and getting us on the record. If you have lost a grant from any federal agency and you are an arts organization or cultural organization, you can submit written testimony to this council, okay? And so you can use our toolkit that we put together. The deadline to submit that written testimony is July 22nd. If you have not had a federal grant canceled and you are an arts and cultural organization or an artist, we still need your voices, okay? You can reach out to your state senator and your state rep, let them know that you know this hearing took place, ask them to talk and connect with their colleagues to hear what they learned, and share your story and share your concerns, okay? So we just need to continue to hold this issue up and make sure that our elected officials know we're paying attention, that this is a big deal for us and for the sector. Finally, on the local front, every municipality in Massachusetts will be having elections this fall. That means every mayor and city councilor is up for re-election, every select board member, school committee members, they are all up for re-election, and candidates are looking for your vote. So what does that mean? It means that if you are in Boston or Somerville, Mass Creative is working with local arts leaders to work on Create the Vote coalitions in those two communities. We have a forum, a mayoral forum, where all three of the certified candidates who are running for mayor of Boston will be appearing. We encourage you to come to that. We encourage you to bring 3 friends. We need to make sure that we pack that forum so that every candidate running for mayor of Boston knows this is an important issue and that there are voters out there who care about this issue and are considering it when they go to the ballot box, right? If you do not live in one of those two communities, you are probably still going to get calls from candidates or texts from candidates. Last week, I got a lovely text from a candidate in Somerville who is running for city council. And I texted back, "What is your arts and cultural policy platform?" And their response was, "I don't have one." And I said, well, I don't vote for candidates who do not have a policy platform and a vision for arts and culture in for whatever office they are running. And then he said, well, what are your concerns? And I said, I'm worried about the displacement of artists. I'm worried about arts funding. I'm worried about the delivery of arts education in schools. I did that as a private citizen, right? Like my vote matters as much as your vote, as much as my neighbor's vote. But when candidates reach out, it is really important to make sure that they hear that you vote. When you vote, you are considering arts and culture issues, and that is something that is important. Unless we make it clear to candidates that this is an issue that we go to the ballot boxes and consider, we will not see candidates and elected officials leading on these issues, right? So this is like, you can do this, when somebody knocks on your door, when a volunteer makes that call, you can be nice about it, but you can also say, tell your campaign manager or your volunteer manager, I don't vote for candidates who do not prioritize arts and culture in their campaigns, right? It's a really quick and easy thing that you can do. All right, so with that, I am going to be moving us along to the main focus of our conversation, which is about creative workspace. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to attempt to make sure I can do this. Let me see, can I do this? I can. Oh, I've never felt more proud of myself in my life. Okay. So I am really pleased that we have three fantastic folks who are working on cultural workspace policy work and issue work. So we have Ami Bennitt, who is the co-founder and a member of the volunteer steering committee of Art Stays Here. Hi, Amy. Thanks for being with us. I have Jim Grace, who's the executive director of Arts and Business Council. Hi, Jim. Thanks for being here. And then I also have Anna Sengupta, who is the Director of Arts and Culture for the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. And Mass Creative is frankly just really fortunate that we get to work with all three of these organizations all the time when we are talking about advocacy for creative workspace, for fighting the displacement of artists. So let's dig in. So we have, I think the goal here is that you all are going to leave this call, everyone who's joined us for this call, you're going to know a little bit more about what the issue is. You're going to hear about what is happening already that you could potentially plug into, and you're going to hear about some ways you can get involved and actions you can take. Sound good to everyone? Awesome. Okay, so I'd like to start out with, let's just like set the table here. So Amy, what is creative workspace?
Mm-hmm. At Art Stays Here, we consider creative workspace separate from what some people call live workspace and separate from artist housing. It's a third space, if you will. So people might have a place where they live. They might have a place where they work if you have a day job or otherwise. And then your workspace is your studio where you do your creative work. And that could be a visual art studio. We sometimes differentiate between visual art and music rehearsal because music rehearsal requires soundproofing and other types of physical attributes. But it's a third place where creatives not only keep their artwork and create their artwork, but also the gear, the equipment, and all kinds of materials related to being able to do that work.
Amy, does it also include performance?
So there is also rehearsal space for performing arts, traditionally like your ballet or different kinds of dance, theater, opera, etc. And those would typically be kind of organizational or large group rehearsal spaces. There are some that are private. There are some that are shared. The work that Art Stays Here primarily does is for individuals, like artists and musicians that I just pointed out. But I will say that there is a need for larger group rehearsal in Boston. There's a lot of theater companies, there's a handful of opera companies and dance companies, and there's not enough space for each organization to have their own.
Got it. Okay. Annis, what makes creative workspace different than housing or live workspace? We just heard from Amy that workspace is different than those things. So can you just give us a little insight as to why are those different?
Sure. I mean, let me just say, first of all, housing and live workspace are creative workspaces for many artists. And so we recognize that they're an important part of the creative cultural infrastructure. But I come from a planning background. I'm at the Regional Planning Agency for Metro Boston, and planning is built around a municipal policy tool called zoning. And the foundation of zoning is separation of uses, which means that the policies that municipalities have that connect to housing are different from the policies that they put on commercial, industrial, and mixed use, which is housing and commercial or retail in one building. And when we're doing our efforts for advocacy and policy making, it's really important that we have a way to differentiate between the policies that are digging into how housing can better support artists in the region, in the state, and how policies can ensure that we are preserving the cultural spaces of production and presentation that we have and expanding them, because we really don't have the spaces currently that meet the need or spur the kind of economic growth and vitality that we could be generating from the arts and culture sector.
Thanks, Annis. And Jim, you have been at this for a while, and you and I have had a lot of honest conversations about this.
Yes, we have. Yes.
Why is it harder to preserve or grow creative workspace in Massachusetts?
I don't know if it's, I mean,
Or is it? I should say that.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah, there was actually just the first of its kind summit in San Francisco on this idea of a creative land trust. And I definitely heard from all over. There were 20 cities represented. It's really hard everywhere. I mean, gentrification is at an incredible pace. It may be by degree, depending on where you are, but I think in general, there's factors that just make it difficult. It's capital intensive. It takes a lot of time. You need a seller that cares about preserving it. There's a whole, I think, almost like I think of cooking, there's a recipe and ingredients that can either be positive or be challenging. We have a ton of wonderful buildings throughout Massachusetts that are wonderful spaces where art is made. And there's a lot of folks on this call. I recognize many of them that are managing and have preserved those spaces. So we have a great inventory of wonderful spaces. It's just a question of what you're working on is the policy needed in order to put that recipe together to preserve more.
And Jim, as a follow-up,
Yeah.
I'm gonna sort of tease this out, actually, this is probably Jim and Annis, last legislative session, the legislature and the governor really celebrated the passage of a really important housing bill, a bond bill, right? That is chock full of ways to increase housing production in Massachusetts, right? Like we all know, the rent is too damn high, and so there was a lot of both state and federal streams of funding to deal with the housing crisis. Why are we not able to do the same thing for workspace?
I got to take the first part of it. I think we have many mechanisms that we're borrowing at the Artivist Town Hall. We're borrowing many affordable housing techniques and access to capital. So we have a wonderful Blue Hub Capital is amazing, and we have used them multiple times to preserve space. Same thing with other folks on this call. So we do have CDFIs, these intermediary mission-based banks and capital that are wonderful and flexible. So it's access to capital that's flexible. And on time and affordable. I mean, that's going to be a bit of the balance that is going to be a piece of it. So it's just a volume question. I mean, it's just how much capital is required to preserve these spaces is a lot.
Okay. And just to be real simplistic here, what you're saying, you keep saying capital. You mean like a building, like an old warehouse building
Yeah.
is going to be sold to be, and and it could be used for a lot of different things, but who can quickly collect the money, the capital to be able to buy that building and then to be able to develop it out. Like that's going to really decide whether or not that old warehouse building becomes, biotech labs or workspace, right?
Correct. Yeah,
Okay.
especially if the building is already an existing space, you already have people there. They're
Right.
they're working there, they're living there. So you have the benefit of them having it, you're basically buying a business at that point. But yes, it's the speed at which you can access that capital, which many people on this call, Amy with Humphrey Street too, it's the speed at which you have access to that capital, not just the amount of capital that will be an element, especially when we're talking about policy and
Mhm.
levers of government or levers of private sector or even the nonprofit sector. It's, those pieces are going to be, again, an ingredient for success or challenge to make this harder than it already is.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Annis, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to say quickly on the municipal side, there aren't the same tools for municipalities and government to be a partner to the private sector and the nonprofit developers to be producing cultural space. And one of the things that we've been hearing is that space is expensive, but it's also the cultural space doesn't have the same mechanisms that you have for affordable housing. And one thing that I learned recently that I think is fascinating is that um, Somerville actually created their affordable housing trust fund before it was put into the state legislature, and it was used as a model for that. So there really is, it's in recent history that those policy mechanisms for affordable housing have been built up. And they really are a great model, both on the private side and on the public side. And I think it's something that we should be really digging into.
Awesome. Okay. Okay. So Amy, you and your co-founders are honestly an inspiration to me. Because you all, when the alarm sounds, you are all there. You are there and you organize people really quickly and help make a difference, which is so phenomenal and exactly what we need. Where are we in terms of the loss of creative workspace? Are we at a crisis level? Is this a new issue? Like, just sort of locate us in terms of this question.
Sure. Sure. So, artist displacement, and I'm just going to use the word artist when I also mean musicians. Um, Workspace displacement has been going on for decades. In my opinion, mostly because there are not policies and protections in place to deal with anti-displacement. And however, there's both, sometimes we're in crisis right now on the music rehearsal side in Greater Boston. We actually have a little more inventory than we're used to, which is kind of confusing because 3 years ago there was a blight and we were down about 250 studios. And this is because they are mostly privately owned, and some of the buildings were up for redevelopment, kicked out all the musicians. But then, because of interest rates and the price of construction going up, and because development takes many years, actually paused their developments and invited musicians back in. So sometimes we are hair on fire. It is a blight, and we've been there. And sometimes it changes. It's been really confusing. And I think for everyone on the call, it would be the best way to really think about it is that the inventory for artist workspace, not just music rehearsal, is fluid. And what I mean by that is that sometimes things are getting displaced or closing, and sometimes new stuff is coming on or getting preserved, but it doesn't always stay that way permanently. The solves that Art Stays Here and Arts and Business Council and some other partners, New Atlantic Development, have been working on are what we call in perpetuity or permanent solutions, so that whether something is owned by a mission-driven nonprofit, a mission-driven developer, a municipality, or government, that fluidity will not happen in those places, meaning they would be affordable workspaces in perpetuity. Where there are private ownerships involved, we can encourage that and kind of benchmark that, but we clearly have no control over it.
Okay, thanks, Amy. I'm gonna move us. So, sorry, just one follow-up. You've talked a lot about Boston, the greater Boston area. Is this only a greater Boston area issue? She says with a wink.
Well, actually, it's funny. I was going to say, oh, there's one more thing I forgot to say. So Art Stays, and it's what you just addressed. Art Stays Here primarily works in greater Boston. So Boston proper, Somerville specifically, and we cover Cambridge, although, and I know that there are some Cambridge people here today. As far as I know, there are 0 artist workspaces still in Cambridge, except for the Foundry, but that's, not necessarily individual spaces that are, rented by individual people. But last year we did a year-long advocacy campaign in East Hampton. East Hampton, you might say, that's in Western Mass. And there are a handful of former mill buildings, well, first of all over the state, but specifically in Western Mass. And there is a artist community called Cottage Street Studios. Sometimes displacement is not just about closing a building or redeveloping it or selling it. In this case, it was actually about the owners doubling the rents. So we would call a displacement situation is also extreme rent increase. We did a huge campaign out there for over a year. It actually didn't work. But this month right now is 1 year since the campaign. And there's lots to say about it. I'll move on from that. And then also the year prior, we did a year-long campaign in New Bedford on the South Coast. Most people here might be familiar with something called the Star Store. At the time, it was in downtown New Bedford, and it was mostly classroom space, workshop space, and studio space related to UMass Dartmouth's CVPA program, which is why can't I remember it now? Performing in visual arts. So their basic undergrad and grad arts programs. UMass Dartmouth pulled out of that. There was all kinds of political drama between UMass, the state of Massachusetts, the city of New Bedford, the owner, etc. The long and short, though, is that 2 years later, and most of you know this news, is that the Arts and Business Council, Jim Grace,
spoilers, Amy, spoilers,
was able to buy it. So I'll let him talk more about that. But I guess one point there is to say that sometimes advocacy that happens at one time pays out later.
Yes.
And so the New Bedford situation is a case of that, and perhaps we'll be in that situation again with Jim Grace regarding East Hampton or maybe Holyoke at some other point.
Before we get to you, Jim, thank you, Amy, for sort of expanding on that. So, Jim, I love that you said that there's a recipe, right? Like with many, many ingredients. And again, MAPC, Arts and Business Council, and Art Stays Here all play sort of very distinct roles in this conversation. And so I would love to, I'm going to start, Annis, if you can talk a little bit about how MAPC has worked with Boston, Cambridge, and Somerville. Like, again, your catchment is the metropolitan area of Boston. So I think you go as far north as Salem.
Ipswich.
Ipswich. Oh, forgive me for those on the call who are from Ipswich. I do not mean to exclude. And so you go as far north as Ipswich. You can tell better your catchment, your geography catchment. But could you talk a little bit about the work that you've done related to creative space in sort of this triad of cities?
Sure. Yeah, we're sort of like a cookie out of Eastern Massachusetts, from like Ipswich, swing around 495 to Hudson Marlborough, and then back over to Duxbury, and you kind of got the region. So we did a project with Boston, Cambridge, and Somerville that was actually modeled after the London cultural infrastructure work that one of the staff in the city of Boston at the time had been involved with. And somehow we keep getting more of these staff coming and moving to our region. So we're awash in expertise right now, which is amazing. And this, Boston wanted to do this work of mapping their cultural infrastructure, developing policy, creating better equitable access to cultural space in the city. And we said, okay, we can do this with you, but we have to include Somerville and Cambridge because they're all part of the same ecosystem that is serving the same set of artists. And so we had a multi-part project that involved both inventorying the cultural space as much as we could with the capacity of municipal staff and MAPC staff, interviews and focus groups with 77 participants, stakeholders, about 38% of them identified as people of color, and they represented a wide variety of artistic disciplines, and as well as a lot of informational interviews with planning staff and GIS staff to ask, how do you know when an art space is going to be impacted by new development that's coming in? How do you incorporate information about arts and culture into your planning work? And it was very arbitrary. If a planning staff happened to know someone in an arts and culture role, they might ask them, they might not. There wasn't a systemic way that information was even being fed into planning processes. And so we really distilled sort of a set of 4 main challenges that really are impacting municipalities' ability to support cultural space. And one of them is that their planning and zoning policies don't even mention arts and culture most of the time. They're just omitted. The second one is that arts and culture spaces are invisible to the people making planning and policy decisions. We don't know where the spaces are. There's lots of reasons that artists stay under the radar and don't necessarily want to make their spaces known. And part of that is that arts and culture tends to trigger multiple types of regulation. These spaces are never just one thing, and they would have lots of different permitting processes that are very cumbersome to go through to get permission to do all of the things that they need to do to make their work economically viable because they don't fit into a single zoning category. And then municipalities themselves, even when they know the problem, even when they're like really invested in solving it and preventing artist displacement, they just lack effective tools to expand cultural infrastructure. So they're often just trying to come up with customized solutions as any one displacement becomes visible to them. And it's very reactive and it's not consistent, and artists don't have a way of having like an understanding of how to work within the system to protect their interests and advocate for their interests. And so, what we took from that is that we need to be able to define arts and culture, understand what we mean when we're talking about it, not just partly in like data, like having data about it so that we are understanding what the needs are, who's here, what are they doing, what kind of activities are involved, but also how it's defined in zoning, how it's defined in our state policy. What are the ways that we are actually making a commitment to support this sector through the policies and how we're defining arts and culture within them? Mapping where it's happening, integrating it into all of these GIS systems that tell us where we're going to put our new roads, where new parks are going, where new development should happen. We don't know that arts and culture is there. There's almost no way for planners to, prevent the impacts or ensure that they're actually expanding this cultural infrastructure that we need. The third piece is just allowing it to happen, move away from just like layers and layers of ways to say no and start to say, this is a fundamental part of our communities. This is a fundamental part of being human. We need to find ways to allow it to happen as much as possible. And then really work to expand cultural infrastructure and give municipalities the tools that they need to be partners in the financing piece, to be partners in the acquisition piece, to create cultural use restrictions that allow in perpetuity holding spaces for cultural use to be protected in the way that we do with open space and the way that we do with affordable housing.
Got it. Thank you, Anis. So Anis, you mentioned that one of the problems here is that like it's hard for artists and creative communities to advocate for what they need because it's like a messy, not like super transparent process. Amy, you and Art Stays Here has done a phenomenal job of helping organize artists to do just that. Can you talk a little bit about how you do that, or sort of what? And again, recognizing that you have several wonderful success stories with coalitions in different areas, and sometimes it's still a TBD on the outlook. So if you could just share one or two stories and
Yeah,
your approach, sorry.
sure. So the current approach, which is not sustainable, is kind of hair on fire. So someone is at risk for displacement. They find out the owners are selling, or etc., something like that, or doubling the rent, and they reach out to us, kind of like a 911, ask for help, and we come in and do a number of things. Some of those things include creating a tenants association. Sometimes it includes creating an advocacy campaign regarding preservation or otherwise. Sometimes it's a fundraising campaign. But all of that has to do with organizing the artists, tenants, meeting with various stakeholders involved, whether that's elected officials, people that work for the municipality, different funders, developers, owners, in a lot of cases, Jim Grace or MAPC Annis, or even Mass Creative. And we kind of put together a whole onslaught of support for either preservation or relocation, or whatever the goal is. And some of that work can take at least a year, and some of the projects have gone on for 5 or more years. This stuff is really slow. It takes a long time. And that also kind of connects back to what Jim was saying about not just about having access to money, but to liquid money. And having access to money is one thing. Having access to liquid money is actually even harder.
Got it. Thank you, Amy. And Jim, your organization. Yeah, that's really helpful. So Jim, your organization has come up a couple of times in terms of some of the ways that you're doing this work. Could you share a little bit about the Star Store, but also sort of how Arts and Business Council is involved in this effort?
Yeah, sure. So this dates back actually to one of my first days on the job when in Fort Point, the Sleeper Street building was sold. And then over the years, so we were originally involved in Midway Studios. We were the first group, part of Midway Studios back in the day. I'm an original board member of that group. We also then helped and co-developed a project in Worcester with Creative Hub Worcester, which is a wonderful organization, and worked with them for 6 years. They're the current owners of it, but we, in a sense, purchased that for them at that time and co-developed it together. 3 years ago, and that should open up this winter, actually. So that's a good example of a 10-year project, really from start to finish. It does take oftentimes a lot of time, especially for a gut rehab. 3 years ago, we purchased Western Ave Studios in Lawson Lowell. So that's a big project. That's 240,000 square feet, 300 studios, coffee shop, gallery, nonprofit, so it's big. And then the Star Store, which was about a month ago, which is another 125,000 square feet. So we're currently at about 400,000 square feet of artist maker space. We have an offer to purchase Central Street Studios. This is where really Amy and I, for the first time, kind of came together, where we got notice of that building being for sale and then kind of partnered on that piece. And so we have an offer to purchase that. Hopefully that will work out before the end of this year. And we have about 2 or maybe even 3 other projects in our pipeline with other owners that are looking to preserve their space over time. And really, I know I saw that Jay Padgett was on the call. Really couldn't have done this without the funders. I mean, Jay was key in helping with both of those initial purchases with facilities grants. So it is a network of funders as well that are flexible and understand the needs, that really be impossible to do this work without kind of a network of folks like that kind of get it. So that's kind of where we came at this. It's always been about capacity building, resources, spatial justice, those kind of issues.
Got it. Thank you. It's really, really helpful. And just flagging that, Jim, you were referencing with Jay Paget, who runs the Mass Cultural Council's Cultural Facilities Fund. I'm going to drop that link in the chat right now, where you all can learn more about that fund, which has done an enormously successful job of both preserving and growing creative space writ large in Massachusetts. Thank you, Jay, and your team. Okay. Thank you. So already I'm seeing the chat is starting to get populated with like, what about this? What about this? So I'd love to hear from all three of you. What are one or two policies that you feel are needed on the municipal and or state level to address this?
I'll start. People are soon going to get sick of me heralding the city of Somerville, but it matters and it's real. In Somerville, a few things. So, most people have heard about the Armory. That's something that the city took by eminent domain so that it wouldn't displace the artists. They've gone through master planning and all kinds of community process to make it affordable, equitable, and they're about to release RFPs. So I don't know if I actually endorse municipalities operating artist spaces, but certainly owning them, saving them, preserving them, and helping. Somerville also, through the tool of zoning that Annis mentioned a few years ago, actually in response to the artist risk assessment that MAPC worked on with the city of Somerville, created specific zoning in Somerville. It's called the Fabrication District that helps disincentivize redevelopment of certain types of potential artist workspace buildings. Similarly, another thing in their development toolbox in Somerville is they have these things called ACE, Arts and Creative Enterprise Set-Asides. Certain types of development in Somerville are required to, I guess, not donate, but build, have, own, rent 5% of their commercial leasable square footage for arts and creative use. Some of those zoning tools, they're not perfect, and we've actually had to tighten them and kind of tweak them over the years. For example, the ACE set aside, although amazing, the municipality itself does not have an infrastructure or a way to actually get those spaces online and to the creative community. And also, there's no affordability built into it. So that's a giant next step that needs to happen. So I guess regarding policies on a municipal level, we're encouraging other municipalities to look at Somerville and take on some of the tools and ideas that they've adopted, because it doesn't actually cost money, which is also super cool. I'll stop there.
Thanks. Annis, what are your thoughts? What policies?
Well, I would +1 the arts and creative enterprise use as a really good practice for defining arts and culture within your municipal planning and zoning. And it's not just in the zoning, it's also tied to their plan documents that are saying arts and cultural workspace is a critical part of what makes Somerville Somerville, and it's a really important thing that we're trying to protect. And so you're tying the whole thing together into a set of policies that reflect the goals of the municipality, kind of speaking to what you were saying, Emily, about having a vision and a platform for how arts is supported. But the other piece is, we're doing a project with Somerville to sort of prototype what a cultural space trust could look like in a municipality. And that is a nice way to sort of start to explore the ins and outs of what it would mean to implement the Creative Space Act that is at the state level. And the reason that we want to have the Creative Space Act at the state level is because it will create a preservation, a use restriction, not just preserving the architecture of a historic building, which is really what the historic preservation restrictions are designed for, but preserving creative and cultural use for a particular building and having that be an option that can be used by property owners, by municipalities that own these spaces to create that more permanent protection, and would allow municipalities to create their own cultural space trust that can hold both property and financial resources to be used for investment, to subsidize, to plug the holes in the private sector system more effectively. And the reason we want to do that at the state level is that I'm not sure everybody knows this, but we have 351 municipalities in Massachusetts. And to get this option to all of those cities and towns, they each have to submit a home rule petition, which is an individual bill to the legislature that has to get passed within a legislative cycle, and then would create slightly different versions of how this gets implemented across the state. So artists or folks who are looking to take advantage of it have to use different rules and fit into the bespoke options that every municipality chooses. And so this would be a way to really simplify that, make it easy for municipalities to opt into it, and have something that artists can advocate for their municipalities to take advantage of.
Thanks, Annis. And Jim, from your perspective.
Yeah, I agree with both that. I would say yes and yes. I think the only maybe wrinkle I would add is that we've seen a lot of community benefit agreements come on over the last 20 years, except the problem is that the spaces that come out of that aren't really usable for a specific discipline. So you think about Amy and, performance space, that's a very specific type of space. So if the artist or end user could be earlier in the process so that those spaces are built out or designed for a particular use or type, we have tons of space in Greater Boston that's sitting either empty or unusable because it just wasn't, because the end user wasn't there to help design it. Think of dance or height of the ceilings or sound, or there's a bunch of just relatively straightforward adjustments where you put the electricity if it's outdoor public art or whatever. So getting earlier in the phase process so that cities and towns are not approving these buildings with a cultural output that isn't already then designed for use in perpetuity. Condo them out. There's a lot of these spaces that are, 5, 7, 15-year leases, and then we lose them. So the permanence, the kind of designing for the end user or artist type, and to Anis's point, with a longer term plan that fits in. So each building might solve a piece of a larger plan. That would be amazing.
Awesome. Thanks, Jim. Amy, you have your hand raised. I suspect you have a follow-up. Amy, are you?
I do. I just want to piggyback off of what Jim was just saying. Can you hear me? Hello? Okay, great.
I can hear you now.
I want to just respond to what Jim was saying about community benefits agreements with new development. Art Stays Here has spent the last 2 years working on a development project in Somerville called Summer Nova. And what I want to share is that although what Jim says is true, in this particular case, we were able to carve out community benefits that were specific to arts and culture, and that did have both
Amy, you're breaking up, and so
how they're
Amy, can you add your comments,
which we're calling form built. So, whether they're subdivided or sound reinforced, as affordability, which is one of the first commercial affordabilities ever. And that community benefits agreement is valued at over $50 million for arts infrastructure.
Okay, Amy, I'm gonna just mute you, not because what you were saying is not important, and I just want to flag she's talking about the community benefit agreement that was part of the deal for the Summer Nova development in Somerville. A huge win for artists and the arts community in Somerville, and largely a result of long-term advocacy and organizing. Okay, really quickly, I want to get us to questions because I suspect we have a number of them. Folks want to get involved. That's the whole point of these calls. They want to know more about what's happening, connect with folks who are doing this work. To that point, for each of you, what's one thing you would recommend somebody who is interested in this issue or is passionate on this issue should do? We're going to do a lightning round. So, Jim, you start us.
I would say getting to know the owners of these buildings. They're usually very passionate about what they've built. They have a sense of their own legacy, and starting earlier, once they usually, if they pass away, usually the estate or the kids will often sell them. So meeting them early, getting to know them. You might already know them, might be a tenant there, starting to have a conversation about long-term planning and preservation. I found them to be usually very receptive, or at least they'll give you a piece. So getting to know your owners, and it's doable. I guess the positive thing is this is doable. People can come together and preserve these spaces with some help, but people can do it. They can create wealth. They can do it for their nonprofits. They can preserve community spaces. This is doable.
Awesome. Thanks, Jim. Thanks for the optimism too. Annis, what's one recommendation that you have for getting involved?
Call your legislator, tell them to support the Creative Space Act. Ask them to make sure that the Ways and Means is going to pass the Creative Space Act. Just make sure you're getting commitment from them. Tell them how important this is. Tell them that this is an issue that's impacting the entire state. Yeah, we need to get this across the line.
Thanks, Annis. And Amy, what's one thing? We're going to lose you again, Amy. All right. Amy, I think, is having some technical difficulties. I'm going to urge everyone to get it. One of the things that the Arts Days here has done so phenomenally well is organize. And I think all three of the folks on this call have flagged that this is not an overnight issue. It didn't happen overnight, and it's not going to be solved overnight. So long-term, sustained, consistent advocacy, which I will confess is the least flashy kind of advocacy and the least sort of immediately fulfilling advocacy you can be a part of, but it is the most effective and most impactful is where we need to head. So Annis just put a link in the chat to endorse the Creative Space Act. We really hope you'll do that. We have the way that the legislature works is that they're going to have a whole bunch of hearings on all of the bills that were filed. They've already started. We anticipate that the hearings on bills that are part of the creative sector agenda, which are pieces of legislation that you all in the creative sector said you wanted to prioritize and that we work to follow, will get hearings this fall. So be on the lookout for that. There's lots of ways, but if you endorse that bill, you will get more up-to-date, more specific and direct engagement and advocacy around that bill. The other thing you can do is you can urge your state legislators to co-sponsor all three bills that are part of the creative sector legislative agenda. We'll drop a link into that chat. And all three, Jim, Annis, and Amy, and their organizations and their teams are fabulous. If you don't know them, we're going to drop in the chat the links to get to know them better. Although I'm puzzled if you don't. Their work is so impactful and is wide ranging. But we encourage you at Mass Creative to get involved in the work that they are doing. I think we have time for maybe one or two questions. If anyone wants to raise their hand and come off mute. I'm not seeing any hands. Brianna, if you would like to come off mute, we'd love to hear your question.
Hi, I was wondering because I have a very direct situation with our space that we're in a mill building. Is there kind of an ongoing conversation? This is really helpful, but I know the topic changes month to month. Is there like a round table of spearheading this creative space work that we can join that I may have missed, but I didn't know?
Brianna, that is my dearest, sincerest dream. And so let's use this call as the first kickoff meeting of that group. We can follow up. I'm sure all of our panelists are interested and willing to be part of that conversation with us. So Brianna, yes, we will move forward with that.
Well, I'd love to be a part of it because I have a current project to work on.
Awesome. Okay. V, forgive me if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly, but V, if you'd like to come off mute, if you have a question, we'd love to hear it.
Hi, and you said it right, V. Like usually it's some other variation. But I'm really thankful for this meeting, because I'm very curious about what the state has for all the things that have been passed by this administration. I would love to know more about like what the state has, not just in the sense of arts and culture, but to preserve artists, because Massachusetts is very expensive. So I say all this to say is that what are some resources or like some, I guess, like insider information that you know regarding our representatives in the way of like how this administration and its cutting is going to ultimately affect folks, and then like what is the plan B behind it? Because I know like a good friend of mine who works at a dance studio in some town past Milton. Like for me, once you're past the MBTA, I don't really know where that is unless it's like the news or the Weather Channel. So I think
Right. When you say this administration, are you referring to the Healy Driscoll administration? Are you referring to the Trump administration?
Trump administration.
Okay. So,
So yeah.
so, so you're interested in yeah. So I think what we have a number of resources on our website that are related to actions that have come out of DC and the ways both what it means and how it's going to impact our communities, and then actions you can take that we can direct you to. At the beginning of this call, we talked a little bit about Congress has begun its budgeting process for fiscal year 26, which includes cuts to the NEA and the NEH. Obviously, on July 4th, we saw a piece of legislation get signed by the president that will have long-term impacts on communities related to healthcare, food justice, transportation, and housing. And we are trying to monitor all of that as well. And we have some of those resources on our website. Is that helpful?
A little bit. The questions was more so like for organizations that are directly impacted, I guess, what are some resources or advice that you can give those folks, whether it's the program manager or the staff who are going to be affected by these
By
decisions?
the loss of funding or by executive?
Yes,
Yeah,
definitely.
okay. So at the beginning of the call, we talked about there was a hearing yesterday that a House committee, the State House Committee, held to get more information around what the impact of federal funding losses will be to the arts and cultural sector. We really encourage you, if you have folks who have had their federal grants rescinded or canceled, to submit testimony. We also encourage you to reach out to lawmakers. We know that private foundations are working to mobilize dollars, both national and local foundations, as much as possible, to try to mobilize dollars to meet this need. We also know they will not be able to meet all the needs that are going to come out of all of these cuts. But we are working hard to try to sort of direct folks to those. Again, our website's a great way to do that. There is no immediate answer, unfortunately. I think thanks, Jim, so much for being on this call with us. Janice and Amy, thank you for your time and your energies. So V, there's no single place that we can direct you to. We just know what we're hearing and we're trying to relay it as quickly as possible.
Okay. I'll definitely share the links you put in the chat and let folks know how they can get their voices heard.
Awesome. Thanks so much. All right, we are at time. Thank you again to our panelists, Annis, Jim, and Amy. We really appreciate it, and we will talk soon. Thank you all. We are taking the month of August off for Artivist Town Hall, so be on the lookout for September's next town hall. And in the meantime, if you're in the Boston area, please register to participate in the Boston Forum. We're going to have one in Somerville, TBD on that date. And please take any of the actions that we dropped in the chat. All right, thanks all.
Everybody.